Hi everybody, this is lesson 6 of the 12-week beginner series. Not a lot of new stuff this week. We're going to get into the third sequence of Meyer's 4 opening drill, so that is the cut starting from the upper left, and then we're going to look at the Shiel how. So if I'm in my high guard with my left foot back now, my 4 cuts are going to start from the upper left. So I'm going to throw a downward cut from the upper left all the way down. I'm going to let the sword turn over. I'm going to retrace that line. Then I'm going to roll back, fingers to thigh, throw a rising cut, and then I'm going to step and retrace that line. And then I just come right back up to Vom Tag. Usually students would be going all the way forward, turn around, come forward again. I'll go backwards just for the camera. So again, an Oberhow from the left, letting it relax, retracing that line, fingers to thigh, Unterhow from the left, retracing the line, back to Vom Tag. So that 4 cut sequence, just starting from the left, is the third of the 4 sequences. So hopefully students will, if it's going well, we'll start putting together sequences 1, 2, and 3 as a full work exercise where they're going forward, back, starting to do it with some offline steps, and we're just trying to get them flowing through that pretty well. So after we've reviewed all the previous material, we get into the third cutting sequence, and then the only thing we get into beyond that is an introduction to the Shiel how. So the Shiel how is a descending false edge cut that is used to counter an Oberhow or used to counter a point forward guard like Flug or long point. So, and this is one of the places where the version you're going to see in Meyer is going to be maybe different than what you see in something like Ringek. So Meyer, who prefers a high guard, if I want to make sure that I'm not going to stab my opponent, I'm going to use the high guard. But and if I want to stab my opponent, and I do like to stab people in the face, I might use the lower version. But regardless of which version you're using, structure is key and pivoting is key. You know, I constantly make the joke that the Hadouken from Street Fighter is you know, the key to all the body mechanics. But it's really important. Because I'm throwing a descending false edge cut, if I don't pivot, if I just, whether from here or from here, if I just try to throw a back edge cut, it's kind of weak, and maybe I'm twisting my body or my wrists pretty well, but if I'm here and I pivot my body, you can see how much across the line that puts my sword already. Even here, if I pivot my body, right, so I'm going to square things out. Now, it's pretty easy to throw a descending false edge cut, and I have good structure. So if I do this sideways, if I do this, it's kind of weak and wussy. If I pivot, you know, my body is supporting this action. We always want to have our skeleton, our body supporting the action, and not just bending our joints and putting ourselves in weak positions. So regardless of which one I'm doing, if I'm in this overhead guard and I want to throw a descending false edge cut to counter an Oberhow, I'm going to pivot. And you can see that this really high position is going to make it very unlikely I stab my opponent in the face. So we're going to be throwing across line. We're actually going to be aiming at the opponent's right ear. So I'm going to throw a descending back edge cut, trying to clip my opponent's right ear. And so that pivot's going to be really important. And I can counter their Oberhow and cut them. I can also counter their Oberhow and use a slice or a thrust after that. But it's very important that we pivot and come down. I do prefer actually the answer the phone or even the lazy shoulder Vom Tag because I'm a big fan of stabbing my opponents in the face. But most of the essentials are the same. So I would say if you're learning this from the lower Vom Tag, you might even go with the lazy on the flat version. And again, pivot. Because if we try to push and drop, it shouldn't be a multi motion. I shouldn't be clanging and then trying to slide down. It should be a fairly single flowy action. So if I pivot and I pop out my sword, you can see I've come down with the false edge. I'm across the line, so my right hand is kind of in front of my left hip. So I've crossed the line. If they're in an extended guard or even in a plow, I'm going to try to essentially cut down their sword. I call it kind of the wedge effect. So if the opponent's here, I want to hit their sword and I want to be kind of aiming towards their quillions in a downward cut that kind of opens this up. So I want to take their point off the line while my point gets on the line. So I'm going to pivot, back edge cut, and then I'm going to step forward and stab him right in the face. But I have to do it with the pivot. If I just try to clang over without letting my body turn, it's not going to work too well. And if you're lucky enough to have a partner in this time, you can actually tell by the sound and how much effort you have to put in if it's working or not. If you hear a big clang, you're probably just whacking across, and that's not really what we're looking for. If you hear more of a slidey zing sound, you're probably getting the right kind of downward cut that is going to open up their sword and give you a good on the line position. And it shouldn't feel super hard. It actually feels kind of magically easy when you get the angle and the structure right. So just make sure that you're getting a pivot and a punch, and the sword's going to come down. I find if my hands are lower than the blade, the point, this works better. So don't do this, where your hands are actually higher. I find that weak and not working too well. If I can keep my hands low, that tends to give me a better structure. And if you can, have your hands lower than your opponent's hands. So if my opponent is in kind of a sternum high long point, I'm probably going to make sure that my hands are a little bit more hip level. That hands being slightly lower than the opponent's hands really seems to help. And make sure you finish the cut. So I think it's almost like I'm trying to cut down and chop off their quillions. So if I hit and I finish my cut, it's going to come down to their quillion. Their point's going to be off the line, and my point's going to be on the line. And so I can pivot, step, and thrust. This is a hard thing to practice if you don't have a partner. If you have a Pell, at the very least, you can practice making sure you're coming down to the right side. So if I'm facing my opponent, and I don't want to be coming down on the right side. So if my right hand is in front of my right shoulder and hip, and I'm on this side of the Pell, it's not working. I want to make sure that I'm cutting the opponent's ear on this side. So I want to make sure that I pivot and punch so that my blade is coming down on what is, for me, the left side of the Pell. So I don't want to be on this side. I want to make sure I'm crossing the line. Crossing the line. And even if I'm in this higher guard, I want to make sure that I'm pivoting and crossing the line. I'm aiming for that right ear. And I want to make sure that I have good structure. Try not to hit the top. So that's not ideal. Really, you do need partner feedback to get a good sense of this, but if you're stuck at home in quarantine and you have something to aim at, that'll at least give you kind of a visual cue to make sure that you're crossing the line. And we'll work on the next thing next week.